Hello, class, and welcome to our next lecture on brain bisection and the unity of consciousness. I recommend that you check out these couple of YouTube videos down here in the bottom left. They're great supplemental materials for this lecture. Now, a little bit of background on how the brain works. Visual inputs are controlled by opposite halves of the brain. So things that your right eye sees are processed on the left side of the brain first, and things that your left eye see are processed on the right side of the brain first. Tactile inputs from your hands are the same way, so the right hand is controlled by the left brain, and the left hand is controlled by the right brain. Smells are different. Smells are ipsilateral, meaning each nostril goes to the same side of the brain. And the left hemisphere is where speech is produced. The smells is just a fun fact, but the crosstalk of the eyes and the hands and the left hemisphere controlling language is important for this lecture. So what happens, or what can happen, is there is a muscle that connects the two lobes of the brain, the right half and the left half. This muscle is called the corpus callosum. And it used to be that people who had severe epileptic seizures would undergo a surgery where the corpus callosum is snipped right in half. So what this does is it causes the left brain and the right brain to no longer have the muscle or the pathway that allows them to communicate with one another. Now they're still sort of connected at the base of the brain, but the main highway between the left and right brain is split. The two hemispheres are floating independently. And in experimental conditions, this split of the left brain and the right brain can cause very strange effects. So for instance, if the word, as we can see in this image, ring, is flashed on the right side of the screen, that right eye sees it, which is processed by the left side of the brain, and recall that the left side of the brain processes language, so the patient will say, "I saw a ring." But let's also say at the same time that the word key is flashed on the left side of the screen, as we see here. So that visual input is processed on the right side of the brain, which does not have a language processing center. The patient will not recognize or be aware or be able to say that they saw the word key. They only say that they saw the word ring. However, if their left hand, which is as well controlled by the right brain, where the process of the word key was visually sent to, if the patient searches for an object among several objects with their left hand, it will get a key, and the patient won't know why. It's very, very strange. The split brain can cause all sorts of peculiarities like this, where because the left and the right brain are not communicating with one another, there are cases in which motor coordination patterns are easier. So, like the thing where you pat your head and you rub your stomach, you can do much more complex drawing tasks that have to happen immediately. And if we try to do these tasks without the corpus callosum split in half, we run into trouble because there's crosstalk between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere for what we see and what we mean to draw with our hands. Patients, however, who have the corpus callosum split can move their right and left hands independently. The right hand can sometimes slap away the left hand if the left hand is reaching for a blouse that doesn't match one's pants or shoes or whatever. So in any event, it looks like by splitting the corpus callosum, maybe you invite a second mind in the brain, that there's a second conscious or at least functional person in there making decisions and deciding what to grab, even though we're not aware of it, the patient isn't aware of it. But it's important to note that in everyday life, these experimental conditions don't apply, that the people who have this surgery live much happier lives because they're no longer having epileptic seizures, and their everyday lives aren't these experimental conditions, and they think that they have a completely normal experience. It's only in the lab, in these very particular conditions where you can flash visual stimuli on the right or left side of a screen where the other eye doesn't see it, that you get the strange behaviors. But These people can drive and play piano and go swimming and walk around and never know that there was any difference from when their corpus callosum was intact. So in the paper that we read for this lecture, Nagel asks how many minds are in the brain, given that these studies make it look like maybe it could be more than one. So in answering this question, Nagel gives us 5 possibilities. There are 5 possible answers that he poses, which is first, that patients have one fairly normal mind, which is associated with the left hemisphere. And the responses emanating from the nonverbal right hemisphere are the responses of an automaton. The second answer is as well that the patients only have one mind in the left hemisphere. But there are some isolated conscious mental phenomena that occur in the right, but it's not a mind. The third option is that patients have 2 minds, one which can talk, the left hemisphere, and one which can't, the right. There's a fourth option, which is that the patients have one mind whose contents derive from both hemispheres, and in these cases of split brains are rather peculiar and dissociated. And the final option Nagel offers is that these patients have one normal mind most of the time, but while the hemispheres are functioning in parallel, everything is just fine. However, in the experimental conditions, two minds emerge. So in normal everyday life, the patient has one mind, and in the experiments, they have 2. So the first thing Nagel does is he rejects the plausibility of the first 2 explanations. Nagel says, look, support for the idea that we have one mind comes from the fact that awareness does not occur in the right brain because there's no language center. But Nagel wants us to avoid begging the question. Just because there's not a verbalizability in the right hemisphere does not mean that there is no mind. It looks like the right brain is capable of producing functional and coherent behavior on the basis of sensory stimuli, and just because the right brain can't talk doesn't mean it's not aware of what's going on. And likewise, against number 2, Nagel suggests that if someone's left hemisphere was almost or entirely completely destroyed, they would be in a bit of trouble. They would not be able to interact or operate mostly like someone with an intact brain, but we wouldn't call them an automaton. They still have a mind and they operate, and maybe there are some everyday interactions with the world that get clunkier or stranger, but they still interact with the world. And as we see here in the image, this is a famous case of Phineas Gage, who had his the left hemisphere of his brain almost completely destroyed by a rail spike, and he survived. Though his personality changed quite a lot. It's a famous case in psychology. So likewise, just because the left side of Phineas Gage's brain was destroyed does not mean that he's no longer a person or is an automaton. He's just functioning from sort of a different set of conditions for consciousness, so it seems. And important is that the right hemisphere displays enough awareness of what it's doing. It understands like that word ring or the word key, and then it's able to like grab a key. It can follow instructions. And there's something that has what seems to be a characteristically mental state about the subject that is the right hemisphere of the brain. It is able to produce action on the basis of sensory stimuli. Nagel also suggests that 3 and 4 are implausible. So what Nagel does is he says, look, it's not that patients have 2 minds and one which can't talk, because it looks like in normal everyday life the patient has one mind, of course, and they report having one mind. However, in the experimental conditions, it doesn't quite look like they have one mind, it looks like they have 2. And so Nagel doesn't give us reasons to think that either of these answers is wrong, but rather suggests that both of them seem right. And in as much as both of them seem right, they make each other implausible. As he says, if we ascribe the integration to a single mind, we must also ascribe the experimentally evoked dissociation to that mind, and that is not easy. And what's, I think, particularly interesting as a reflection, this is an image of Nagel, what's particularly interesting as a reflection by Nagel on these cases is in the experimental conditions where it looks like there might be 2 minds living simultaneously at once. The behavioral evidence doesn't seem to support either a one-mind or two-mind hypothesis, precisely because the behavior of the two hemispheres of the brain is simultaneous, that the action and the perception occurs at the same time. There's not a lag time or a transfer of information time. There's I see and I say what occurs in the left hemisphere, and I'm not aware of seeing, but I can still interact with the world from what is processed in the right hemisphere given what I see in my left eye. And the simultaneity of this makes it look like there's two minds acting independently because they're able to do different tasks at the same time. However, the patients themselves are not just two minds, two hemispheres interacting with the psychological equipment to take these tests. They're also people who are sitting in chairs and thinking, I'm taking a psychology test right now. And that part of their brain feels to them very integrated. So when Nagel suggests number 5 as a possible explanation, that they have one mind, but then it splits into two in experimental conditions, it looks like we can't tell if there's one or two minds, but even when it looks like there's two minds, there's at the same time what seems to be one mind, which is the sense of like sitting in the chair and taking the psychology experiment at all. So Nagel concludes that none of these explanations are plausible, that these split brain cases are a real enigma. So when we ask ourselves the question, how many minds are in your brain, are going on in here at once, we want to count. We want to say there's one or two or maybe three or some other number. We want there to be a number of minds going on in our brain. But the evidence don't give us, the data don't give us a good reason one way or the other to give us a countable number of minds and brains. So here's what Nagel says at the end of the paper. If I'm right, and there is no whole number of individual minds that these patients can be said to have, then the attribution of consciousness or conscious significant mental activity does not require the existence of a single mental subject. So what he's saying here is the experience that we have that is conscious and interactive with the world, our like everyday lived experience, doesn't require a countable number of minds. We should be skeptical of the intuition that there must be a single subject of consciousness to make sense of our experience of the world. And the concluding kind of banger line from this paper is that the concept of a person seems strongly committed to some form of accountability. There's me. I am one. Accountability. Since even this seems open to doubt given these split brain cases, it's possible that the ordinary simple idea of a single person will come to seem quaint someday, where the complexities of the human control system become clearer and we become less certain that there is anything very important that we are one of. So there you go. Split brain cases make it hard to tell if there's one mind or two minds or how many minds are going on in the brain at a time, but maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is our experience and the mind that we experience ourselves as having.